Welcome all to my channel English Literature for Competitive Exams. Today we will talk about Walter Whitman, a 19th century American poet, essayist and journalist. I've tried to capture and present all possible details about Walter Whitman with an eye on all kinds of competitive exams. Please enjoy the video and remember that this video is available in both Hindi and English. Please like and subscribe to the channel to remain updated of my future videos. Thank you. Let's get started. Walter Whitman was a 19th century American poet, essayist and journalist. He was born on May 31st, 1819 in West Hills, town of Huntington, Long Island. His father, Walter Whitman Sr., was of English ancestry. He was a farmer and carpenter. His mother, Louisa Van Welser Whitman, was of Dutch descent. He referred to his mother's death as the great cloud of his life. Walter Whitman was the second of 9 children. Walter Whitman Sr. named 3 of 7 sons after American leaders: George Washington, Andrew Jackson, and Thomas Jefferson. Whitman was named after his father to distinguish him from his father. He was nicknamed Walt. Although often referred to as the father of free verse, he was not the inventor of free verse. Incorporating both realism and transcendentalism into his writings, Walt Whitman was a humanist as well. Walt Whitman considered all religions equally important. In 1823, when Walt Whitman was just 4, due to poor financial difficulties, his family moved from West Hills to Brooklyn. Due to his family's poor financial situation, Whitman remembered his childhood as being usually restless and unhappy. From 1825 to 1830, he attended public school in Brooklyn. In 1830, Whitman left farmer schooling at the age of 11 to contribute to the household. In 1830, he began learning the printer's trade at the age of 12 and developed a deep affection for reading. Whitman later worked as a journalist, teacher, and government clerk. He served as an office boy for 2 attorneys. He also worked as an apprentice and printer's devil for the weekly Long Island newspaper, The Patriot, edited by Samuel E. Clements. Whitman continued to study on his own while working at The Patriot. He had become acquainted with the works of Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, and the Bible at a young age. He eventually left the newspaper, The Patriot, to work for Erastus Worthington in Brooklyn and then the Long Island Star. Walter Whitman had a great admiration for Abraham Lincoln. On the death of Abraham Lincoln, he wrote his popular poems, "O Captain, my Captain," "When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed." In 1836, at the age of 17, he began his career as a teacher and continued till 1841. In 1838, Walt Whitman, at the age of 19, founded the Long Islander weekly newspaper, serving as its reporter, editor, printer, and delivery boy. By the early 1840s, he had broken into professional journalism, publishing a series of 10 editorials in 3 different newspapers titled Sundown Papers from the Desk of a Schoolmaster. In 1841, he moved to New York, where he worked for people like Park Benjamin Sr. and Rufus Wilmot Griswold. In 1841, Whitman took journalism as a full-time career. In 1842, he was appointed editor of the New York Aurora. In 1842, he published his first work, Franklin Evans, or The Inebriate, a temperance novel. In 1846, he became the editor of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. In 1846, he began anonymously publishing his second work, Arrow Tip, in Brooklyn Daily Eagle. Later, the book was published with a new title, The Half-Breed, A Tale of the Western Frontier. In 1848, Whitman left the Brooklyn Daily Eagle due to his support for the Democratic Party's Free Soil wing. Same year, he left New York and moved to New Orleans and became the editor of the New Orleans Crescent. In 1848, he co-founded a Free Soil newspaper, the Brooklyn Freeman. In 1852, Whitman serialized a mystery novel entitled Life and Adventures of Jack Angle, an autobiography in a New York newspaper. This mystery novel was lost for over 165 years. It was rediscovered in 2017 by Whitman historian Zach Turpin, who came across some familiar phrases while searching for Whitman material in an online newspaper. In 1855, Whitman published the first edition and his first poetry collection, Leaves of Grass, with his own money. Leaves of Grass provoked a scandal because of the explicit sexual content contained in many poems. Many critics called the book profane and obscene. Brooke and Burroughs called the Leaves of Grass Bible of Democracy. Leaves of Grass, first published in 1855, is a landmark in the history of American literature. Whitman achieved recognition as America's national poet and America's greatest poet as Leaves of Grass gained esteem in England, Germany, France, and Denmark. When the book was first published, Walt Whitman was fired from the Department of the Interior after Interior Secretary James Harlane read it and declared it offensive. The first edition of Leaves of Grass had only 12 untitled poems and a preface. The poems of the first edition, which were given titles in later issues, included Song of Myself, A Song for Occupations, To Think of Time, The Sleepers, I Sing the Body Electric, Faces, Song of the Answerer, Europe, the 72nd and 73rd years of these states, a Boston ballad, There was a child went forth, who learns my lesson complete, and Great are the myths. The first edition in 1855 appeared without any publisher's and author's name, but only the famous engraving of his portrait by Samuel Hollar. Whitman sent a copy of the poetry collection to Ralph Waldo Emerson, who praised Leaves of Grass. In a letter to Walter Whitman, Emerson wrote that it was the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom America had yet contributed. In 1856, Whitman released the second edition of Leaves of Grass containing 32 poems. He added 20 new poems to his original 12. In the second edition of Leaves of Grass, Whitman included Ralph Waldo Emerson's letter without his permission, which offended him. Whitman used the title Poem of Walt Whitman, an American, in the second 1856 edition, which was shortened to Walt Whitman for the third 1860 edition. The second edition of Leaves of Grass includes some famous poems like Sundown Poem, which is well known as Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, Salut Amon, A Woman Waits for Me, Spontaneous Me. In May 1857, due to financial constraints, he joined the Brooklyn Daily Times as an editor, where he remained until 1859. In 1858, he published Manly Health and Training under the pseudonym Mose Welser. In 1860, the third edition of Leaves of Grass was published by a Boston publisher. Whitman referred to this edition as his new Bible. It included the earlier poems as well as 146 new ones. In 1862, he went to Washington, D.C. during the American Civil War and took care of the wounded and dying soldiers in hospitals and remained there until 1873. In May 1865, he published Drum Taps. It is a collection of war poems. The collection originally consisted of 53 poems. In 1865, he published a sequel to Drum Taps, which bore the subtitle When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed and Other Poems. The collection consists of 18 poems. When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, Race of Veterans, O Captain, My Captain, Spirit whose work is done, Chanting the squire deific, I heard you solemn sweet pipes of the organ. Not my enemies ever invade me, O life, ah poverties, wincings and sulky retreats, as I live with my head in your lap, camarado. This day, O soul, in clouds descending in midnight sleep, an army on the march. Dirge for two veterans, how solemn as one by on, low victress on the peaks, reconciliation to the leavened soil they trod. In January 1865, Walt Whitman began working as a clerk for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but was fired when the Secretary of the Interior discovered that he was the author of Leaves of Grass, a book he despised. In 1866, The Good Grey Poet got published in response to the firing. In 1865, he authored the renowned elegy When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, and O Captain, My Captain was written in the wake of Abraham Lincoln's death in 1865. In 1879, he delivered the first lecture on Lincoln in New York. In 1890, his final lecture on Lincoln in Philadelphia. In 1867, he published the fourth edition of Leaves of Grass, Drum Taps 1865 and sequel to Drum Taps 1865 were included in the fourth edition 1867. In 1871, fifth edition of Leaves of Grass came. In 1871, he published Democratic Vistas, a prose pamphlet. In 1871, Passage to India, Whitman makes a reference to the Suez Canal and wire line across the Atlantic. In 1871, After All, Not to Create Only. In 1871, As a Strong Bird on Pinions Free. In 1874, Prayer of Columbus. In 1876, he published sixth edition of Leaves of Grass. In 1876, Memoranda during the war. In 1873, he suffered a stroke that partially paralyzed him, forcing him to relocate to his brother's house in Camden, New Jersey. In 1881, he published the seventh edition of Leaves of Grass. During this period, his poems were related more to soul, death, and immortality. In 1881, James R. Osgood published Leaves of Grass with the final arrangement of 293 poems, but in 1882, the book was withdrawn due to complaints of Boston District Attorney. In 1882, Boston District Attorney Oliver Stevens banned a version of Whitman's book that was printed to look like a Bible. Stevens believed the contents violated laws against obscene literature. In 1882, Specimen Days was published. Specimen Days and Collect, the poet's memoir who has many memories of Long Island. In 1888, November Boughs was published. In 1889, pocket-sized edition of Leaves of Grass published for his 70th birthday. In 1892, the final edition of Leaves of Grass, known as the Deathbed edition, was published. Whitman memorialized President Lincoln in the Deathbed edition in his two poems, When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, O Captain, My Captain. By its later editions, Leaves of Grass had grown to 14 sections: Inscriptions, Children of Adam, Calamus, Birds of Passage, Sea Drift, By the Roadside, Drum Taps, Memories of President Lincoln, Autumn Rivulets, Whispers of Heavenly Death, From Noon to Starry Night, Songs of Parting, First Annex, Sands at 70, Second Annex, Goodbye My Fancy. Whitman died on March 26, 1892 at the age of 72. Walt Whitman referred to himself as American Bard at last. Mary Whitall Smith Costello said about Whitman, "You cannot really understand America without Walt Whitman, without Leaves of Grass. He has expressed that civilization up to date, as he would say, and no student of the philosophy of history can do without him." Ezra Pound called Whitman America's poet. He is America. Whitman introduced readers to previously forbidden topics, sexuality, the human body and its functions, and incorporated unusual themes such as debris, straw, and leaves into his work. Walt Whitman's sexual orientation is commonly assumed to be homosexual or bisexual. According to his biographical materials, he was involved with a man named Peter Doyle for decades. When Whitman was 21 years old, he was accused of having homosexual relations with his students at the Locust Grove School in 1940. Walt Whitman was known to visit friends while completely naked in the 1870s and 1880s. Whitman described nakedness as liberating. Nature was naked and I was as well. Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula and England's poet laureate, was so taken with Whitman's work that he and his friends called themselves Walt Whitmanites. Whitman is also famously known as Bard of Democracy, the Prophet of Democracy, the Good Grey Poet, Father of Free Verse, Homespun Philosopher, Representative Poet of America. Pride of America, Nation's Greatest Poet, Universal Poet, the Seer of Cosmic Consciousness, Poet of Body as well as Poet of Soul. Walt Whitman's honors and achievements. In 2009, Walt Whitman was inducted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame. In 2013, Walt Whitman was inducted into the Legacy Walk in Chicago. As the introduction to the 150th anniversary of Leaves of Grass, literary critic Harold Bloom wrote, "If you're American, then Walt Whitman is your imaginative father and mother. Even if, like myself, you have never composed a line of verse, you can nominate a fair number of literary works as candidates for the secular scripture of the United States. They might include Melville's Moby Dick, Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and Emerson's 2 series of essays and The Conduct of Life. None of those, not even Emerson's, are as central as the first edition of Leaves of Grass." Some major works by Walt Whitman. Franklin Evans, or The Inebriate, A Tale of the Times, 1842. The Half-Breed, A Tale of the Western Frontier, 1846. Life and Adventures of Jack Angle, serialized in 1852. Leaves of Grass, 1855 to 1892. Manly Health and Training, 1858. Drum Taps, 1865. Democratic Vistas, 1871. Memoranda During the War, 1876. Specimen Days, 1882. The Wound Dresser, Letters Written to His Mother from the Hospitals in Washington during the Civil War, edited by Richard M. Buck, 1898. Walt Whitman Speaks, His Final Thoughts on Life, Writing Spirituality and the Promise of America as Told to Horace Traubel, edited by Brenda Wineapple, 2019. Some famous quotes by Walt Whitman. "Not I nor anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it by yourself. It is not far, it is within reach. Perhaps you have been on it since you were born and you did not know. Perhaps it is everywhere, on water and land." Leaves of Grass. Another famous quote from Song of Myself. "I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you." I say these are not the parts and poems of the body only, but of the soul. I say now, these are the soul. I sing the body electric. With that, we have come to an end. Thank you for watching. Please Please like, share and subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more upcoming videos. Thank you so much.